All right. Here, let me go ahead and I think I failed to say this earlier. So let's take a look at something else that's pretty interesting about access. We've got all these things open up here, right? Well, we can see this would be our close, right? This would be our normal close for closing the application. But then we also have this X down here for just closing these, right? For closing our tables or our objects, right? Closing up our objects. Or I can just go up here and I can click right here and I can say close right there, and to close just one of those, or I could have gone here and gone close all and closed all those up, right? So that's no problem. Now, we've identified our objects, right? We have tables, queries, forms, and reports. And we've said that, hey, the tables are the heart of our database. Without a table, we don't have a database. These are the tables of the data, right? Of the data that we have to do all the other stuff with. Now, our forms are just fancy user interfaces for those tables, right? So we've got a products table, right? That's data. Then we've got a products user interface, and that's how we input data or change things about the table there. Then we go and we run queries, right? Queries that we build to answer questions from that data, right? To mine that data for information. And then we had a report, which is just a fancy printable version of that. Right? So now I'll go close all those up. And with that reasoning, seeing that these all flow from these tables, let's take a look at this. We have another view of our objects. We can come here. Right now, I'm in object type, but I could go table and related views. And by doing that, now you can see this is organized by table. The supplier data table only has that one table. It then has one query built from it. It has one form to interact with it, and it has one report based on this query. If we go to the products table, we have all of these queries, this one form, and these two reports. Right? I really prefer being back on the object type, but it's definitely a personal preference, or it depends on what you're working on, right? And so once we come back to this, let's open these things up again, and I wanted to show you that we also, in addition to having at least two views of the objects we might work with, we have at least two views of our objects themselves. So here we've been looking at, right, this is the data sheet view of our table. But this is a convenient way to view this, but this is not the way we build this thing, right? We build this by coming over here to the view button, and this is a toggle button, right? I'm going to come down here, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to come down here to design view. And this is how we actually build this thing, right? And how we do this, you see all of these fields, right? The fields are now running as horizontal there instead of being vertical like they were before. We were back here; they were the column headers, and now we're seeing them like this. So product ID, right? This is the primary key. See that primary key thing there? If the button for that's right there. If that wasn't already done, I can just come here and click that right there. Then, once I give it the field name, I come over and I tell it what kind of data can be in there. This is a form of data validation, right? Only short text, and then a description of what it is. So this is kind of the higher level big data validation, saying it has to be short text. But then down in here, this is where I get down to the nitty gritty, and we'll look at this a lot in the next video, or in the next class. All right, but down here you can see what I've said is that, hey, this primary key has to be 4 characters in length, and then this down here, this is that input mask that I was talking about earlier, where so this thing has to be, the code here is these 2 capital L's, that's 2 capital letters followed by the 0, so it has to be alphanumeric, 2 capital letters followed by 2 numbers is the input mask. And that input mask, what that means is that defines what can go into that cell. And that's just like when you go to create a username or a password, right? And the website says, this has got to be 9 characters, 2 of them have to be special characters, 2 of them have to be uppercase letters, and it also has, and it gives you all that stuff. That's called an input mask, all right? It restricts what type of stuff can be put in there and requires a very specific format. Right? And the rest of the stuff we won't deal with today. We're actually going to build this thing in next class, and that's going to be super exciting, right? I know, I can hear the excitement from you right now. All right, I'm going to go back to data sheet view there, and let's bring up our form for that. Take a look at this and say, hey, there are other views for this too. This is how we would interact with it. But if we come over here when we're building this thing, come down to layout view, and hey, now we can change how this thing is laid out. Come on, we can move this around if we want someplace else, or we can change the shape of this thing. I can go ahead and maybe just go ahead and I'm going to say, hey, make this smaller, right? Now, here's something interesting. When we changed data and we tried to close the Access database, it just did it, right? It just saved it. Watch this. If I try and close this now, it says, hey, you changed something structurally about Access. You'll need to save those changes. I'm going to go ahead and say cancel and not do that. But so in order to do that one, I have to actually save. I make a structural change to this. So that's layout view of this one. And now let's hop over and take a look at our query, right? Our query inventory value. Here's our normal view of it. But if we come over here and we do the toggle, we go into the design mode of this one. And hey, what the heck is this, right? Well, this is our products table, right? Our products table. These are our field headers here. We can drag our field headers down into these columns down here. And this is where we build the query, that we build the calculation that's going to occur. Then we go up and we click run and it does that. And we're gonna build all of these queries in our next class. But essentially, you should recognize some of this stuff kind of from, or being familiar from Excel, right? This here, these are kind of like the structured references that we dealt with back in Chapter 4 of Excel, right? When we studied tables in Chapter 4 in Week 3. Now this down here, this is more like when we did pivot tables and we made calculated fields, right? This is like, this inventory value is a calculated field based on these other things. So it's somewhat familiar, but we'll start building these a lot in the next class, right? And then the next thing the last thing we're going to look at, right, is the report, the fancy printable version of that. And of course, we have another view of this too, several views, but we're just going to go and take a look at the layout view. We can do the same thing we did with the form. We can really kind of change the way that this thing's laid out. We can move these things around, and then once we do that, if we hop back over, you can see, hey, that's moved, right? We can change the structure of this thing, right? You know, I think we've spent plenty of time with our introduction to a database today. Let's call this a day, and when we do this again in the next class, what we're going to do is we're actually going to build this entire thing. We will import this data from external sources. We will we'll build a form and a report, and we'll see how we create these queries and the information that we can get from them. All right, well, I'll see you next time.